Very recently on this very show, we took a look at a system that was emulating Genesis games very, very poorly. But there are a lot of companies out there that have also tried to make Sega Genesis systems, even some with the blessings of Sega themselves. We're going to take a look at a console that many of you may have actually seen on store shelves, and if you were smart, you didn't pick it up. On this box, you'll find the logo for the Sega Genesis, and directly beneath that, it will say Classic Game Console. Now immediately when you see this, you would assume that it is an official product from Sega, and you would be right. This is a licensed real thing that Sega was involved in some capacity. But you need to look closer at the box because there is a bright warning that you should be paying attention to at the bottom right. And that warning comes in the form of a logo for a company called AtGames. You may be blissfully unaware of who this company is, and unfortunately I'm about to break your innocence. This game company has worked with several other video game manufacturers, like Atari and people like that. They licensed older video games and older video game hardware names and re-released them with whole new designs. Now while the Sega logo is on this box, this console was never actually made by Sega. We assume it was made by AtGames in-house, but we can't even be certain on that. What we can tell you though is that this model is referred to as the Firecore, a name that sounds way more epic than it is because they might as well have just called it the Dumpster Fire. This console comes bundled with not one, but two wireless controllers. Both of them are 6-button variant Sega Genesis style, and they're very cool to look at. But when you go to use them, they feel sloppy, weird and wiggly, and all the buttons aren't fitting in place. But it gets way worse. When you heard me say wireless, I bet you assumed it was something like Bluetooth or some kind of connectivity method like that, right? Well, no, they're using infrared. You know what that means? On the top of the controller, there's a little infrared light, and it has to be in the line of sight of the console. So yeah, you can sit a little far back, but if you sit too far away, the thing won't connect properly. And even if it does connect, sometimes it misses button inputs, or it just doesn't register inputs at all. But what really makes these controllers impossible to use is that if you're playing any game and you accidentally lose line of sight with the console, it will hold down the last registered input for about 3 seconds, even if you're not pushing it anymore. That makes it impossible to play every single game that you could possibly be playing on this system. So if you happen to have a real Sega Genesis controller, I would highly recommend plugging that up directly to the front of this system, because there is no reason at all that you should be using these controllers. But unfortunately, for the purposes of a review, I have to use the wireless ones. So I'll probably be complaining about that a lot. Now, as for the console itself, it really doesn't look amazing. You've got a power button and a reset button and a cartridge slot on top. And that cartridge slot is supposed to play original Sega Genesis cartridges, more on that later. And on the back, you'll find a surprise. Composite video out with, count them, 1 audio out instead of the 2 standard that you'd get for stereo. Why is it designed this way in 2015 when it obviously should be HDMI out? Well, I've got to assume that they're trying to make this console as dirt cheap as possible. At this point, I'm even questioning if it will turn on. But if you look at the front of the box, it says it has 80 games built into the system. 80! That's gonna be pretty cool, right? Let's strap in and get lost in a world of Sega Genesis classics. When the system powers on, you're immediately met with a main menu where you can select any of the games that are built into the system. And this is where your nightmares begin! Let's start off with Sonic the Hedgehog. At first glance, this seems to be running at the correct speed. But because the controls are just so bad, it feels like the game is playing in slow motion. Every jump, every roll, every kind of movement you'd have to perform in Sonic the Hedgehog just doesn't work when these controllers just don't want to function properly. And just when I didn't think it could get any worse, when I started to play this game and really listen to the soundtrack, I noticed something really wrong. On a real Sega Genesis, this is what the soundtrack from this level is supposed to sound like. How does this AtGames system do it? Well, it sounds like this. And it's not just this level, every single level has this exact same problem. Here's the second stage. On a real Genesis, it sounds like this. And on the dumpster fire, it sounds like this. At first, I had to assume that it was just a bad version of Sonic the Hedgehog, like some kind of broken ROM file or something like that, but no, every single game that you run off this system has sound problems. Here's Streets of Rage. It really doesn't matter what game you choose, they all sound terrible, and you really can't control them. And the controls only become worse when you really consider how bad that kind of input method is when you think about certain games like, let's say, puzzle games like Columns. Suddenly, you're unable to actually time your movements or move properly. For some reason, if there's a delay in the input, it will register 2 double inputs for left or right, meaning that you will not be able to line up your jewels properly. Look at me here. I'm trying to just get it in that one column, but I can't! And by the way, despite the fact that they proudly claim they have 3 Mortal Kombat games on here, you would never want to play Mortal Kombat with these controllers. Every single movement doesn't register properly, so trying to do anything is just impossible. And somehow, bizarrely, the controls can get even worse. We were playing Streets of Rage 2 2-player, and when you're actually using 2 controllers separately that are both infrared fighting over the same input, certain button combinations will basically block out the other player and prevent their inputs from being registered. How is this even a thing that they missed? Right now, I'm pretty sure there's somebody out there thinking,
"You're just being an elitist. All I've got to do is get a real Sega Genesis controller and hook that up and throw away those wireless controllers and also maybe stick some earplugs in my ears so I can't hear the bad sound emulation. And after that, well, the game still run properly, right?"
Nope, they do not run properly. We tried out Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and the game seemed to be running slower, and it also had all the other issues that all the other pre-built-in games had. Then we tried out Virtual Racing, which didn't turn on at all, and we tried other games like homebrew carts like Coffee Crisis, which had tons and tons of visual glitches. The game is not supposed to look like this. But perhaps the worst offender was Comix Zone. Now, Comix Zone has all the same controller problems across the board, but the sound seems to be even worse in this game than any other. The game seems to ramp up and slow down in speed randomly, and this can really affect the way that you play at every given moment. But this one has tons and tons of visual glitches. Look at the lightning on this intro here. It's not layered in properly and appears over top of the frame. That's not supposed to be how it looks. And while you're playing the game, you'll notice flickering all over the place that doesn't show up when the game is being run properly. Everything that this console is attempting to do, whether it be visual, sound, or controls, is a complete and total failure. So, you can't play platform games, you can't play fighting games, you can't play puzzle games, you just really can't play games on this thing. But at least you have 80 classic Sega Genesis games, right? Let's take another look at that box again. Now yes, it says 80 games, but beneath it, if you combine all those Sega Genesis games together, you're only getting 40. And beneath that, it says you're getting 40 bonus games. So that brings your grand total to 80 games, but what the heck is a bonus game? As far as I can tell, these 40 games were not originally produced or released by Sega. Instead of going out and getting 40 more licenses from real manufacturers that originally released games on the platform, they're getting 40 random games that they can just stick on here that hopefully the hardware inside the console can run. But if there's one thing you can expect from AtGames, it's that even the bonus games won't run properly. And guess what? They don't. A quarter of all the bonus games that are pre-built into this system are going to be math puzzles or word puzzles, or in some cases, just things that are kinda difficult maybe, but not really when you really spend time with it. That's what this is. These games are complete and total trash, and maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be so bad if you didn't have to hear that awful soundtrack. Just have a listen at how bad the music sounds in all of these games. Every single one uses a different song, but all the songs are broken. So not only do you have to play a mediocre, or in some cases awful game with terrible controls, but you also have to listen to that broken music. It's irritating. And the next batch of games aren't any better. Now look, puzzle games that deal with math and that kind of stuff, that can be irritating in and of itself because I really don't consider those games, more edutainment. But when it comes to the image-based puzzle games, suddenly you have a whole bunch of things like memory or other stupider things like this one here, Black Sheep. Now do you know how you play this game? One of the sheep in this bunch are looking in a specific direction. You have to identify which one is standing out from the rest, the black sheep, and point the D-pad in that direction. Seriously, that's the game they made. But if you're into something a little bit more challenging, why not play Dominant Color? In this game, there's a whole bunch of shapes that are either one color or the other, and it's your job to select whichever color appears more. It's like you're in preschool again. And for one more added layer of proof that AtGames did not care about the performance of any of these titles, this game here is called Mahjong Solitaire. Now of course the game doesn't play well, and if you listen to the music, well, it sounds wretched, just like everything else we've looked at. But this one is very special, because you see, the people that made this was AtGames themselves. You're looking at a game they produced and manufactured, and it still doesn't run properly on their own hardware. And all the other titles they produce that are on the system suffer from the same fate. That's beyond sad. So if you ignore all the games we just talked about, what's left are legitimate clones and ripoffs of established game series, or in some cases ideas of what a game should be that really don't hit the mark. This game is called Firefly Glow, and it's a ripoff of Simon, but this time you've got a wand. Now in the original Simon, you had different colors and sounds to keep the player engaged, but in this one, it's played in perfect silence. No music, no sound. And maybe that's a good thing because we've heard how bad the sound can be on this system. The position of the fireflies never change and the game becomes incredibly repetitive really fast. But of course, they had to improve upon this with their next title, Sparkling Truffle. Just like Firefly Glow, this too is a Simon clone, but this game has a very specific problem. Now you've got 4 psychedelic mushrooms in front of you that light up in a specific order that you have to repeat. But this time, they tried to add sound, but of course, they messed it up. The mushrooms light up in a specific order that you have to repeat, but they don't make any sound. It's when you try to repeat the process that the sound happens, and it's the exact same tone every single time. Next up is Crossroad, a terribly ugly Frogger clone that plays like a nightmare. Now look, with Frogger, it's very easy to move up, down, left, and right, and that's what makes Frogger so enjoyable to play. But with this game, while moving up and down is fairly easy, moving left and right is nearly impossible. It is so slow that you can't do it while you're crossing the road itself. So you only can do it when you're setting up your run at the bottom of the screen. And then while you're crossing, you better hope that no cars get in your way because you have no chance of survival at all. Now at first I thought this game was called Bomber, but if you look at the title screen, it's actually Boomber. Weird. So, obviously this is a Bomberman clone, but the problem with this game is that there is only one stage, and when you beat it, it takes you straight back to the main menu. You can't adjust difficulty, you can't add extra players, you really can't do much else other than just play this one stage. And the AI is so stupid, they're likely gonna hurt themselves more than they'll hurt you. Next up is a title called Jack's P. Now, why do they call it Jack's P? There are no P's. I have no idea what this game is actually supposed to be about. I assume it's a reference to Jack's Beanstalk, but there are really no beanstalks in this as well, so nothing's really coming together here. Now, this game is ultra simple. All you have to do is line up Jack around a platform that's above him, jump, and then jump to another platform. That's it. The entire game looks the exact same, but it is really annoying to play because there's some really weird broken animation that happens every time you jump. So not only are you playing a very boring game, but it also happens to look awful while you're playing it. Remember Whack-A-Mole? Well, we're back again. This time it's called Whack-A-Wolf. And Whack-A-Wolf doesn't work with this console. And I don't mean that I'm not good enough to play, I mean that you can't play this game with this console and this controller, because there is a slight delay with the way the controller connects to the system. Every time you hit a wolf, the speed increases again and again, and eventually it becomes so fast that the controller can't keep up with the game. Brilliant. Let's try out a sports game. This one is called Curling 2010, which would have actually taken place in the past by the time they released this system, but let's not talk about that. What we need to talk about is that this is not curling. This is closer to dodgeball, maybe, but it definitely isn't curling. All you need to do is pick up the balls that are in front of your character and huck all of them over to the other side of the screen before that character can throw any of them back at you. And once you have no balls on your side of the screen, you win. That isn't curling, not even close. One thing I noticed while looking over all these games is that there really wasn't any racing games, but we're in luck because there is one racing game under the bonus game collection, and it's called Bottle Taps Race. So first off, what we're actually racing here are not taps, but bottle caps. For some reason, while they were making this game, they came up with a wrong word by blending caps and tops together to get the word taps. And yes, you heard me right, you're racing bottle caps. How this game works is that your cap goes somewhere on the racetrack and you flick it along the track. You take turns, one after another, flicking bottle caps down a racetrack. Let me repeat that, you're flicking bottle caps down a racetrack. That is what they came up with for a game. This may be one of the most frustrating racing games I have ever played in my entire life. The AI is relentlessly accurate, and if you just happen to mess up a little bit, just a tiny bit, your entire race is completely ruined. While the name Bottle Taps Race may sound like one of the worst titles they could have ever come up with for any of the games included on the set, it's not. The worst title would go to this one. Mr. Balls. The premise of this game is very simple. What you need to do is make all the Mr. Balls appear or make them all disappear. The trick, though, is that every time you push one of the Mr. Balls, certain Mr. Balls around them disappear. You have to do this in a very specific way, in a very direct order, in order to achieve your goal. This game is a ripoff of something that was released in the mid-90s called Lights Out that was released as a handheld electronic device, and even before that, it was used on Merlin, which is an electronic device that we showed off a very long time ago. While there's nothing really functionally wrong with the game, it's just a strange title and a very gross-looking character that you have to stare at the whole time, plus the usual terrible audio. I really don't know how anyone could stand playing this game while listening to that music. But when it comes to the worst game that is available on this platform, one stands out above all the rest. And that game is called Jewel Magic. Among the 40 Sega Genesis games, you will find Columns 1 and Columns 3. Most people would argue that Columns is one of the best puzzle games ever released on the Sega Genesis outside of Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, and I would be one of those people. But when it comes to what AtGames has done here, it is remarkable. Now, even though they had those two games, they decided to make their own variation of Columns, and that's what this is. Now, I might be totally wrong here, but just hear me out. The original Columns games that are included on this system don't run properly because of the issues with the controller, but this one game seems to have music that is performing properly. Now, of course, it sounds like something you hear from a circus, but regardless, it sounds like it's actually performing the way it was supposed to sound, as far as I can tell. And this also is weird, the controls seem to be working better with this game than almost anything else on the console. It's almost as if they knew that the Columns games weren't performing the way they were supposed to, so they made their own with better features so that it could work on this system. Some saving grace for people that got this console to play a good Columns game or Columns-like game on their platform. But of course, they didn't make a good Columns game, did they? In Columns, you have to match up 3 jewels that look the same, either horizontally, vertically, or diagonally. It's very simple, but that's what makes good puzzle games good. Easy to learn, hard to master. It's really not visually complex, because when you look at the jewels, you can see that even if a jewel has a different shape, it also has a different color. So all you really need to do is either match up the same shapes or match up the same colors. You're never going to have two jewels that have the same shape but have different colors, because that would be confusing. So what does jewel magic do? Well, yeah, you've got a couple different colors, and they're all triangles, but there's two different kinds of triangles. Triangles that point up and triangles that point down, and they can't be matched together. Do you even comprehend how amazingly obnoxious that is? When you look at these pieces, they all look the same, and the colors are dead ringers for the other colors. So what you're dealing with here is a super visually similar design, so when you go to play this game, you get lost in the mix. And that's what makes this so hard. Like I said, the sound seems to work and the controls seem to be better in this game. So all they had to do was rip off the jewels from columns exactly, but they didn't do that. They thought they had to be smart and make the game just a little bit different. But by making it just that little bit different, they made it, in my mind, totally unplayable. But do you really want to know why this is the worst game on the entire system? It's because outside of the bad game design, it seems to be working, which tells me that all the other games on this console are just not working because of an error that they made that they only fixed with one title. And that title is a broken columns clone. This console and all 80 of its games are a complete failure for anyone out there that's looking to get a collection of Sega Genesis games. And if you think for a minute that there's anything redeemable about this console, you would be completely wrong. Sega made an announcement that they're going to be releasing their own variation of a Genesis Mini console that they're going to be working on with a company called M2. Now, you don't need to know who they are, but they do good work and have worked with Sega in the past, making awesome products. But AtGames no longer seems to be in the picture. And this isn't the only time that AtGames has made consoles in the past, but let me tell you, this is one of the worst. And if we're unlucky, we might be checking out more of their consoles in the future.